So I started a company a few years back and haven't shared too much about the back office stuff, but just because of where I'm at in my personal journey, I really want to share a little bit and hope that it can help somebody else who's starting a business, a nonprofit, anyone who wants to get an idea out there. And one of the things that we did really well at, especially early on, was get press for our startup. And just from doing a little bit of consulting, I can tell you that this is something that really not a ton of people understand. And so I wanted to break it down as simply as I could and show you the strategy that we use in hopes that you can use it. And it could be for press, it could be for sales. This information can be used in a lot of different ways, but this is how we used it for press. And so I call this PR 101 by Paul. And so if you don't know me, I'm Paul Burke, and I'm the founder of an app called RentHoop. And we started the app in 2016, and within a couple of months, we got a lot of press. And this is Cheddar U, but what this originally was actually MTVU. I remember seeing this, and I was so ecstatic because as someone who grows up watching like MTV, it was, you're like, wow, MTV is covering us. This is crazy. And so that was one of the coolest things that happened. It wasn't the biggest piece. That was the NBC News piece. And we were on the front page of NBCnews.com for 24 hours. And we saw our web traffic spike. We saw our download spike. And overall, it sent us a lot of traction, which was good. Sorry, this is way too much me on the screen. So we got a couple other dozen press pieces. And I want to share sort of how that all happened, because that is rare, especially for a startup that hadn't fundraised, wasn't by a notable founder. We started literally bare bones. I was working a sales job and funded the company that way, but we had no PR help, no connections. And so I want to explain to you how we did this. So my first advice is remove all doubt. It's a story. And part of that means starting small, because a journalist is not going to write about something that doesn't have any traction, any significance, right? They want a story that's legitimate. And so especially early on, you're not going to have a lot to sell. So you really need to start small with a local newspaper, a college newspaper. I think they even have high school newspapers. Find the lowest common denominator that wants to write about you, who may not be getting press requests all the time, because journalists are getting bombarded with press releases and people reaching out wanting PR. And so it's your job to stand out. And one of the best ways to do that is start with people who aren't getting a ton of press releases every single day. And that's really the best way to get started. So aside from that piece of advice, I'm going to talk about the messaging, whether it be on a press release or an email. And really what I've discovered is there are 5 levers. And I'm not only going to describe those levers, but also how we utilize those levers. So the first is founder. And as you can probably see, my face is on a lot of this stuff. And it's not that I purposely was like, I want to be on the cover of everything. But it was more just like, I'm part of this story and I'm a decent pitch man. Let me be the one to tell the story. And so one of the things that we could leverage was that I was a 24-year-old founder. And we know the media is obsessed with young founders who are doing potentially big things. And whether it be like a Zuckerberg or Spiegel, I am certainly not close to that. But they love just this idea of a young Wonderlic creating what is potentially a really big and cool company, what is possibly next. And so that's what we leveraged. But you can leverage where you went to school. You can leverage your connection to the problem. There's a lot of different things you can leverage as it relates to you. And even, starting early when we got into the Redmond Reporter, I'm from Redmond. And so it's, hey, this kid from Redmond has started this thing. And that sort of sets the foundation for a lot of the following stories. So that is the first lever. The next is traction. And a journalist wants to cover something that has some sort of significance, right? So once you start small and you just get 1 or 2 publications on the board, you can leverage other press. And as you can see, I took sort of a snapshot of what's in our press releases now. Is RentHoop has been featured on NBC News, MTV, USA Today, these legitimate publications writing about us. And so a journalist sees that now and says, okay, maybe these guys are worth writing about. And so you can leverage other press by starting small. And that's why I recommend starting small and not going for, the big hitters right away, the NBC News, TechCrunch, whatever, unless you have something really, really significant early on, which being a startup, that's pretty hard to do. So you can leverage other press, but also find maybe one or two other notable metrics that speaks to how well you're attacking this problem. And that can also let journalists know that you're doing something significant if you have some sort of data around that. And then one of the last ones would be leverage fundraising if you have any. Where money's going, that usually speaks to some sort of credibility if an investor wrote you a check. And at the time we got this press, we didn't have an investor, we didn't have any money from any investors. So I wasn't able to leverage that. And we only had 5,000 users, which is really just a blimp on anybody's radar. But because we pulled on some of these other levers, you'll see that's why we got covered. But if you have traction, that's a great thing you want to sell. Third is the problem. So one of the big things, and here's a video from a local news publication. And one of the things that they're talking about is high rental prices. And that's something that's affecting Seattle, San Francisco, New York, Los Angeles. That is a very culturally relevant problem because it's something a lot of people are talking about, how expensive it is to live in places. And one of our pitches is like, hey, living with roommates can save you up to 30% a month on rent. And that's actually a stat from a different company, but it's one that we leverage to let people know that one of the ways you can mitigate the cost of rent is through living with roommates, and our app helps you find roommates. So there's a connection there. And so if you're dealing a big problem, it's really going to help you reach people. The fourth is differentiation. And for our app, what we were pitching is that there's certain apps like Craigslist that are known to being the place you go to find roommates. And what we did was attack them a little bit because there's a lot of horror stories about Craigslist. And so it's something that we wanted to capitalize on. And one of the features that we pitched was, hey, you can see mutual friends of people because we were using the Facebook API login. And so that was a big point of differentiation. And even simpler, we're not creepy like Craigslist. So that worked out pretty well for us. And again, you don't necessarily have to be better than any of these people. You can just be different. Difference can be notable as well. And then the last one, and you see this in nearly every piece, is piggybacking. And it's finding another company with clout and telling the story of your company through them. And so one of the things I found out is what works for the press may not work for investors. So if you're pitching to the press, Tinder, which is a very significant but also controversial company that's extremely relevant and new, that's something that the press wants to latch onto. So Tinder for finding roommates, people immediately get the sense of what that means, how that product works, and how it might become big. Of course, if you're pitching to an investor, they've seen Uber for this, Airbnb for that, Tinder for this, Tinder for that. So they may not love that, but the press likes it because it makes for a pretty easy headline. And so a lot of our press is the Tinder for finding roommates or the Tinder for roommates. And so and you can connect to other companies that are bigger, more successful, more significant and say, yeah, we're sort of like them. And that'll help get your foot in the door and make the press piece more interesting. So here's another thing we learned is that press is not a cure-all. Press helped us get a lot more traffic to our website, a lot more traffic to our app, but it was not a cure-all. It is not your business plan. It is not your number one acquisition channel. But what it does help with is your domain authority and backlinks. So it's going to juice up your SEO, which is pretty nice. And then it's going to give you credibility with investors and with users. You can slap on some logos on your website and say, look, we've been here. And people are going to say, okay, well, if NBC News or USA Today has covered it, it's probably pretty legitimate. And same goes with investors. They're trying to see what is what is reaching people. And so that's one signal that they use to potentially determine that. So these are the 5 levers. And I wrote them down so you can pause it here if it's something you want to, sort of screenshot or capture. And I hope this was like pretty helpful to you, because I know that there's a lot of companies out there that can leverage what they've built to get in the news, and they will see benefits of it to their business. So I hope this helped. Thanks.